Welcome everyone, and thanks for tuning in to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host, Korey Gunz, and with me is the man that you need to go to for all of your insider information when we're talking wrestling and the WWE. He's a contributor for the Pro Wrestling Torch. He is Tom Colohue. Tom, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, sir. I always like doing these recordings because of how nice and flattering the intros are. Thank you very much.
Well, no problem. I appreciate you taking the time. And it's SummerSlam week. We've got SummerSlam coming up this Sunday. We're here today to talk about all things SummerSlam. We're going to run down the card for you. Tom's going to give us his inside info and news and notes that he's heard about each match, and then give you maybe some predictions and get you ready for this Sunday's event. So, Tom, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and get going here.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to your predictions as well.
Well, we'll start with Finn Balor against the Fiend, Bray Wyatt. A lot of interesting build-up has gone into this match. Obviously, this is kind of the debut, in-ring debut at least, of Bray Wyatt's new character, the Fiend. And a lot of interest, at least on my part, about seeing how that plays out in the ring compared to what we've seen in his vignettes and the Firefly Funhouse and all of that. But to start with this one, we talked about predictions early on. From some of your reports recently about Finn Balor, it would seem that this one would probably be pretty easy to call, considering your reports lately about Finn Balor taking some time off. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you think that will play into this match and maybe Finn Balor's future going forward?
Well, I think the first report about Finn taking a bit of time off was from Pro Wrestling Sheet, Ryan Satin's, what do we call it? I want to say website. I'm just going to go with website. So many different names you can use for these things. Publication, that's the one I was looking for. And then from there, in the days before it and the days after it, I've got two reports on Sportskeeda about Finn Balor. One that I was working on for quite a while because Finn Balor's been very unlucky. And there are people who talk to me about Finn and how they feel bad for the situations that he's been in because of pure bad luck, because of injury, because the person who he's feuding with is unavailable for one reason or another. Because Seth Rollins was added to the match at WrestleMania, which would have been just Finn against Miz, with Finn taking the Intercontinental title away. And we now end up in the situation whereby we have Finn against Bray Wyatt, which is a feud we've seen before, a feud that sort of ran itself into the ground. And I personally had to confirm that Finn does want to take a little time off. I don't know the reasons. I don't think anybody really does know the reasons, but I know that they're planning to really have to think about what's going on with the Demon King. Because at the moment, the Demon King character does not seem to be working, or the creative team do not believe that it's working, certain members of them. It needs a reboot, because at the moment, if Finn is not the Demon, for example at Royal Rumble against Brock Lesnar, you know he's going to lose. And then you get the matches against Baron Corbin and Bobby Lashley, where it's clear that he will. When you look at championships, the Demon King has won more championships than Finn Balor without the paint has. Bray Wyatt is just coming back after an incredible push before getting him in the ring. Firefly Funhouse, just an amazing thing, very popular. There's only one way this match can go. It has to be Bray Wyatt.
Yeah, I would think so too, and especially with your reports, I think some people maybe even were surprised that Finn had a SummerSlam match after he dropped the Intercontinental title to Shinsegae Nakamura. I think a lot of people thought, well, that was his way of maybe being written off TV for a little bit, but now he comes back for this match with Bray, and I agree. I think the writing's kind of on the wall that he'll probably take this loss to Bray to really kind of jumpstart Bray's in-ring push, and then maybe Balor goes away for a little bit and comes back. I do want to talk about Bray Wyatt for a minute. Like I said, me personally, I'm really anticipating this match just to see the in-ring presentation of Bray's character. Is he going to wrestle in the mask? What type of wrestling style is he going to use? We've seen him use the mandible claw now for 2 weeks on Monday Night Raw. Is that going to be a new finisher for him? So I'm really interested in the presentation of his character as an in-ring competitor. Is there anything that you've heard about what the creative team is hoping for with Bray, or maybe how they are going to present him in the ring, or just your personal feelings or excitement, if you're as excited as I am to see Bray in the ring with this Fiend character?
They definitely want the Fiend to be different from Bray Wyatt in some way. And I think the best example you have is actually Finn Balor. Because while he wrestles the same style as the Demon, it is more intense. It's faster paced. And that seems to be what they want to do with the Fiend. The Mandible Claw is a perfect example of that, because it's a bit more visceral. It's a bit more aggressive. Just the nature of the move. And it is a popular thing in the company at the moment to try and make sure everyone has at least one submission finisher in their arsenal. There are a lot of people on the card right now who have the option for a pinfall finisher or a submission finisher. The women have been wrestling with this style for a long time. The amount of women on the roster who have a submission finisher compared to the amount of men, it's much higher for the women. That seems to be the plan with Bray, giving him that additional option for a more visceral ending, or a bit more unnerving and off-putting. I don't know if he's going to wrestle in the match. Personally, I hope he doesn't. I just don't think that's the right move, because for the sake of visibility more than anything. It's difficult to see out of a mask like Rey Mysterio wears. Chris Jericho's on the record as having wrestled in a mask in Japan many, many years ago, finding it difficult to see through. The mask that the Fiend wears is a bit thicker, just a bit chunkier, and I think it would very much damage the chances of a good match if he's wearing it.
Yeah, like I said, I'm definitely interested in how they present his character if he is without the mask. You know, what is that going to look like and feel like compared to what we've seen when he is in the mask? So I think this is, even with the maybe somewhat predictable outcome, I do think this is one of the more interesting matches on the card just because of Bray Wyatt. Before we move on to another match, I do want to kind of take an offshoot of this match. I mentioned Finn Balor dropping the IC title to Shinsegae Nakamura. We thought that maybe that was going to be the time that Finn was going to take his time off or get off TV. Obviously, he's coming back for this SummerSlam match. But I think a lot of people would have thought that that was also a time that maybe we would see a renewed push for Shinsegae. He'd kind of been lost in the shuffle, been teaming with Rusev, and really his IC title win kind of came out of nowhere at the time. But now here we are just a couple days from SummerSlam, and the Intercontinental Championship is not on the SummerSlam card. And so therefore neither is Shinsuke Nakamura. Was this a hotshot title change? Do they have plans for Shinsuke? Is anyone on the SmackDown Live creative team a fan or maybe not a fan of Nakamura? Is there anything you can tell us about his future and the future of the Intercontinental Championship?
To talk about the future of this one, we have to start with the past. There has been a lot of upheaval on SmackDown Live. You talk about the tag team with Rusev, that was supposed to continue. The plan was for that to continue. However, Rusev asked for some time off, so he's currently not available. Finn Balor was supposed to be on TV a lot more. He was supposed to be feuding with Andrade. Andrade was unavailable. It's nobody's fault. These situations happen. Obviously, I am in no way suggesting that he should have still been on TV. He needed to be with his family. He needed to be wherever he needed to be in order to recover from the situation. Finn's been unlucky. As an extension of that, the IC title has been unlucky. It was a bit of a hot shot. I certainly wasn't expecting it. Nakamura would not have been the ideal first choice, to my knowledge, but there are limited options, and you consider as well, Nakamura at the moment is about to be feuding with Ali, who was going to be winning the Money in the Bank briefcase. So a lot of this is being written without much of a long-term plan at the moment, just based on the information that's coming out. It could be that they knew Finn wanted time off for a while. It could be that he sort of surprised them with it, and that's why he dropped the title fairly quickly, and he'll be going out on his back. Who knows?
Well, it'll definitely be interesting going forward. So a lot of different angles and storylines coming out of this match and some of these competitors. Let's switch from, we just talked about the IC Championship. Let's talk about the United States Championship. Champion AJ Styles will be defending the title against Ricochet. In the recent weeks, we've obviously seen a big, renewed push for the OC, the club, whatever you want to call them now. Got a big push. AJ wins the U.S. title. Gallows and Anderson are now the Raw Tag Team Champions. Talk to me first about this new OC push. Gallows and Anderson especially. Obviously, AJ Styles was a main eventer, was held in high regard. But Gallows and Anderson seem to kind of be put on the back burner. Apparently, they signed new contracts. Now they're back with their buddy AJ Styles. They're the tag team champions. What kind of plans have you heard that they have going forward for the OC? And are Gallows and Anderson a type of talent that unless they're with AJ Styles in this group, they really don't have a direction for themselves?
When it comes to this whole OC group, a lot of it came down to contracts. There were a lot of rumours around AJ Styles going to AEW, even though at no point was there any indication that that would actually happen. He was one of the first big names to sign a new contract with the WWE despite the interest from elsewhere. He put his stamp on it. He said he was happy where he was. And when you look at some of the talent asking for their release and so on, it was a large, impactful statement. Gallows and Anderson, you're right, they weren't doing too much. What I do think they were at least trying to do, and what I was actually very happy with, I enjoyed the Southpaw Regional Wrestling that they were a large part of. I watched the first episode of their Botch Club attempt, quite similar to Botchamania, but there we are. They've been trying to be creative. They've been trying to find uses for themselves even when they're not being used. I applaud that. I don't think they necessarily need to be with AJ, but it helps. And when they were put with AJ, the idea was that this would help them and encourage them to sign new contracts. Of course, what has happened since is that they have signed new contracts. So there were definitely some assurances made towards the club. And it might just be that they were promised title runs. For the moment, I see it developing exactly as it has been, exactly as it is doing at the moment. They are on a dominant run, they are carrying championships, and they are doing creative things, having fun, and just being themselves. Long may it continue.
I think one of the best things coming out of this run is that Gallows has gone back to the face paint. I saw that on this past Monday, and I thought that was great, kind of going back to his New Japan look. I think it kind of sets him apart. If nothing else comes out of this OC run, having Gallows back in the face paint, I think, is a plus for me.
I would agree with that. He's been looking to do that for a while. But as I say, this is just a case of these two men who are very creative and could possibly have a very strong future in production, just finding new ways to keep people interested.
I would think this match is one that probably is also a little bit easy to call. I wouldn't anticipate AJ Styles dropping the championship here. Would you agree with that?
I actually wouldn't.
Really?
Ricochet has no backup.
So
Ricochet has no backup, whereas AJ Styles has the club. If you're going to establish AJ Styles as a heel, you've got to make sure people want to boo him. So I think he's going to get a few more cheap wins before he loses that belt.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think maybe I misspoke. Yeah, I think AJ Styles is keeping the United States Championship here. Yeah. So if that's the case, what do you see as next for Ricochet? You know, will this feud continue? Maybe, as you just alluded to, will he pull in some backup to maybe make this a six-man feud for a while? What do you see as Ricochet's future on Raw?
I think it's possible we will see him bringing him back up. They've shown that he's friends with a few people in the back. Heath Slater and Kurt Hawkins were a team that he was shown spending some time with. That could be good for them. It could be good for him. You can't keep having the same Styles versus Ricochet match. You have to mix it up a little bit. But I think Ricochet is one of those where it doesn't really matter who he's feuding with. He can keep it interesting. The match against Joe was a very good match.
Yes.
All of his matches against Styles have been very good matches. And there are a lot of people on Raw who we could have very good matches with. Drew McIntyre is still there. That could be a very good match. It's one of those where he doesn't really have a defined style, as in he can work across the board. You have some people, for example, Randy Orton, that wrestles a very distinct style, which doesn't always gel well with certain wrestlers. My worry is WWE tend to put a lesser experienced talent when it comes to the main roster. Someone who hasn't been on the roster long, someone like Ricochet. They'll put them with a big name, and then once that feud's over, they'll put them back more lower down the card.
Right.
And then they can suffer for that. They've had a strong introduction, and then they're back in Gen Pop, back with the wheat and chaff, the meat and bread of the actual industry, just grinding wins out, taking a few losses here and there, just in amongst it, another person to fill up the roster. Really, we should be seeing him against someone like Baron Corbin, who's very well established, very dislikable person for all the right reasons. I think something like that would be great for Ricochet.
And this is just kind of from a fan standpoint, I haven't seen this reported or rumored anywhere, at least myself. Maybe you can shed some light on it. Did the arrest of the Usos, was it Jimmy Uso that was arrested for DUI, or was it Jay? I get them confused sometimes.
I tend not to find it easy to know either, to be honest. But
the one that's married to Trinity.
Absolutely sure.
Yeah, the one.
So was arrested on 20th of March. I believe that was Jay. I believe. No, it was Jimmy.
Okay, Jimmy. I was gonna say I know it's Trinity's.
I want it to be so.
Yeah, it's Trinity Fatu or Naomi's husband. That's how I keep them separate. The one that's married to Naomi and the one that's not. So,
I'm not told either, clearly.
So when he was arrested, did his arrest in any way, shape, or form alter the plans maybe for this feud? Like I said, it looked for a while that maybe the Usos would be that backup for him, kind of making this a six-man feud, Ricochet and AJ, and then you had Gallows and Anderson and the Usos. So did that in any way maybe throw a wrench into plans with this whole angle, or maybe stall it from going forward? Maybe we would have even seen a six-man tag match at SummerSlam as opposed to another AJ Styles and Ricochet singles match. So did that have anything to do with maybe the way that this feud has progressed and maybe what we'll see going forward after SummerSlam?
It's hard to tell. I had heard a few weeks previous that the plan for SummerSlam was a six-man tag. I had heard that they were going to drag out the actual one-on-one match a little bit longer. Meanwhile, they were going to have the six-man tag. The Usos were going to be on the card with Ricochet. Because we've got a lot of one-on-one matches, they wanted to mix it up. They wanted to include some tag teams. And the idea was then that you have a clear challenges for the Raw tag team titles. You get the Club versus the Usos going forward. You get Ricochet versus Styles going forward. Of course, that was before the arrest. I know that the company don't always act on these things, but I think it's very telling that Gallows and Anderson are already the tag team champions and that they pinned one of the Usos, I believe it was Jimmy, to win the titles.
Yeah, it would definitely make sense. You put two and two together. I think that would definitely make sense that may be the case. Let's switch over and talk about a little women's division action. We've got Charlotte Flair is going up against Trish Stratus, of all people. Trish is coming back for another match. I think probably most people think this will probably be her last match or maybe her swan song in the WWE. As a fan, I have to tell you, I thought this match, kind of the build-up for this match, has kind of come out of nowhere. Charlotte Flair wasn't really doing anything. Trish shows up 2 weeks ago on a King's Court on SmackDown, and then all of a sudden we have a match. Don't get me wrong, I think especially in the women's division, this would be somewhat of a dream matchup, pitting someone like Trish Stratus against Charlotte Flair, but it seemed like, especially for a returning legend like Trish, there hadn't been a whole lot of build-up or really storyline going into the match other than Charlotte is, currently looked at as the best. Trish was looked at the best, so let's put them together and kind of have this dream matchup at, the big pay-per-view of the summer. Was that all the thought that really went into this pairing, is just let's put a dream scenario out there for the fans? Was there a reason that maybe there wasn't more of a lead-up or build-up to this match? And how do you see this one going?
Well, first of all, I personally do not believe this will be Trish's last match. I think Alexa Bliss is going to move heaven and earth and kill whoever she needs to kill to get her match with Trish Stratus before the actual retirement. When it comes to the legends coming back, it's hard to pin them down. You get this with The Undertaker for the build-up to Extreme Rules. You had it with Goldberg for this pay-per-view. You can't always get them on that schedule because they're not tied to a contract, they're not mandated to be somewhere, and they have commitments. It's not a full-time job for them. So sometimes you cannot get them there 4 or 5 weeks in advance, and you have to work with what you've got. Charlotte Flair would always have had a match at SummerSlam. She's too big a name to be missing. So this really is their ideal situation. I think there was also a bit of attention paid to the fact that there hasn't been as many women's matches or as long women's segments recently on Raw and SmackDown. So while you've got the 2 championship matches, and there certainly was the idea to have the tag team titles, which now played out on Raw instead, they needed something. In Charlotte Flair, you have a very capable, very talented ring general. In the same way, Trish was against, she was in a tag team with Lita, and it was against, I want to say, Alicia Fox and Mickie James?
I believe so, yeah.
Evolution. Mickie James, a lot of experience, has been wrestling for a while back with the company, knows of any changes with the way they do things, ring generals. You have that a lot when it comes to people who are returning. They make sure to pair them with someone who is very good at calling situations in the ring, even though quite often they overproduce it and you don't really get that anymore. The build maybe hasn't been there as strong as it could. They've done the best they can, I believe. But once you get into that hometown environment and you have a heel as capable and as talented as Charlotte Flair, Trish will be getting all the cheers in the world. There'll be so much heat behind it. I think this is going to be quite a good match.
How do you see this one shaking out then? Do you think, does Charlotte get the win to kind of quote-unquote pass the torch? Not necessarily that she really needs it, but does she get the big win? Or if you think that maybe we're heading towards a Trish Stratus, Alexa Bliss showdown, does Trish get the win over the Queen and then we build up to that Bliss match later on down the road?
It does depend what comes next. And when it comes to someone, the brand value, the name value of Trish Stratus, you're not going to get her at every pay-per-view. She'll only be at the big pay-per-views. So she can take a loss, and she's got 4 or 5 months to recover it before Survivor Series. She's got more than half a year to recover it before WrestleMania. When it comes to saying who I think is going to win the match, Charlotte Flair is Charlotte Flair. She is the Roman Reigns of the women's division. She does not lose matches. This is one-on-one. This is with someone who they can play it off as ring rust. They can play it off as underestimation. Charlotte Flair will be winning this one.
I think I tend to agree with you. Charlotte Flair was my prediction coming in, and even though when you mentioned the Alexa Bliss thing, that kind of made me maybe want to rethink my prediction, but I think I'm going to stick with Charlotte in this one as well. I do want to ask, before we move on to the next match, I did have down that and it's interesting you labeled Charlotte as, the Roman Reigns of the women's division, because I did want to ask you, do you think that Charlotte at this point has almost outgrown even the women's championship, where Charlotte doesn't need the title, and really she doesn't even need to be in a title feud? You can throw her in there with a returning legend like Trish. I think no one would be upset if and when Ronda Rousey returns, that could be someone that she could have a one-on-one match with very little build-up to it and still generate a lot of interest. So has Charlotte reached that point where she's almost bigger than really the division as a whole, or the championships? Or do you think that after this Trish match, maybe they'll start to integrate her back into some more actual feuds within the women's division and on SmackDown Live?
I would agree that I think she's sort of outgrown the title a little bit. And it's a difficult one to gauge because the title grows based on who holds it. If Charlotte had a year-long title reign now, that title wouldn't be above her or below her. It would be exactly at her level. It's hard to gauge on that. But I would say for the last year or so, she hasn't needed the title. She is at that level now where you can put her in a match with a legend with no build-up. People will come out and see it. She is that special attraction, that Roman Reigns, that Brock Lesnar. It doesn't have to be a title match. People will still buy tickets. People will still come out. The concern I would have is that she's already so far ahead in championship reigns of so many people, not just in reigns but in days having held the title. If she keeps going, it will not be possible for her to be caught. At this point, I think Becky Lynch is the only one even close who is active on the roster. To get anyone who's had it for a decent length of time, you'd have to bring back Nikki Bella. She's so far ahead of everyone else. She needs to be away from the titles for quite a while, I would say now.
Let's go to our next match. We spoke about one legend in Trish Stratus. Here's another one that's going to be on the card. Goldberg makes his return, probably looking for a little bit of vindication after that Saudi Arabia show with The Undertaker. But he makes his big return on Raw and will officially face Dolph Ziggler at SummerSlam. There was a lot of rumors and stories swirling around this one. Was Goldberg going to be there? Was he not going to be there? But we got a definite answer this past week that he is going to face Dolph Ziggler. And I'll tell our listeners, off air, you told me you had a lot to say about this match, a lot to talk about. And I'll be honest, as a fan, when I was doing my rundown sheet, this was the match that I probably had the least that I knew to talk about, because it just seems to just come out of nowhere that, okay, Goldberg is going to fight Dolph Ziggler. Okay. It just seems so random, but you said you had a lot to talk about regarding this matchup, so let's hear it. Goldberg, Dolph Ziggler, what do you got?
Goldberg has shown quite a lot in the past that there is a level of humility to him. Even so far back as an infamous match with William Regal, when the match was a very bad match. The two did not gel. It looked clunky. They were constantly missing spots. It was a bad match. And it was the first match that Goldberg had that was more than, say, 2-3 minutes. Regal was very upset. But he says himself that he came to the back afterwards. There was fury at William Regal. Regal was, of course, fired because of it. But Goldberg was happy to put his hand up and say, look, that was my mistake. I screwed up. That has not left him. When you put him in that match with The Undertaker, mistakes were certainly made in that match. Mostly by Goldberg, hitting his head on the door, hitting the ring post, attempting to go for the jackhammer even after that. It was not a good match. I don't think anyone could say it was. I think it was dangerous for both men by the end of it. I can't particularly blame Goldberg. Yes, he made mistakes, but he hurt himself quite considerably. He has been on a mission ever since. saying to himself, saying to the company, saying to the fans, I want to try again. That's not me. I can do better. I think he can do better because, let's be honest, he can't do much worse. So he's been paired up with Dolph Ziggler. I have a report out today at the time of recording on Sportskeeda about the reasons why. From what I've been told, and from what I believed anyway, Dolph Ziggler is obviously a very experienced wrestler. He's a great sell. He knows how to make anyone great. What I wasn't expecting was to be told, yeah, he's also not that heavy. Because they remember that jackhammer not very fondly, and they want to make sure that does not happen again. Dolph Ziggler obviously a little lighter on his feet as well, so if it goes wrong, he can certainly land on his feet. And able to move in midair, so I was told that as well. It might not be a very interesting match. It might be a squash. I doubt it will go more than 5 minutes because it's still Goldberg. I doubt he's begging for a 20-minute match. That's not what he does. I'm sure he wants to come in, have a bit of a scrap, squash Dolph, and then call it that. This might be the very last match we see from Goldberg. What I'm trying to find out at the minute is whether there are future plans for Dolph Ziggler to also be a warm-up match for Shawn Michaels, because while the build-up towards Goldberg is calling out Goldberg, there's also been plenty of calling out of Shawn Michaels, who wrestled in Saudi Arabia, so he also could be wrestling again. And with rumours abounding, of course, and a lot of fan support behind a WrestleMania match between Shawn Michaels and AJ Styles, maybe Dolph Ziggler will be the warm match for that as well.
Is this another case with Goldberg and even with a potential match with Shawn Michaels? Is this another case of the curse of Dolph Ziggler? And what I mean by that is I'm a fan of Dolph Ziggler. Every time that he's gotten any type of sustained push on television, when he had those reigns with the IC title, his feud with Seth Rollins, I enjoy him. I enjoy him much more as a heel than a babyface, but I'm a fan of Dolph Ziggler. But it seems like he always has that, like I said, a curse about him that anytime someone needs a worker to make them look good, someone's coming in that needs to get the ring rust off of them, someone that they know is going to give them a good match and make them look like $1 million, it's always Dolph Ziggler. And so because he's known as a good worker and a good seller and he can have good matches with just about anybody, he's always kind of the victim of the next guy up to get a push or to get a big win on television. He's that guy that kind of does the honors. Do you agree with me in that assessment? And has Dolph kind of accepted his role in the company? I know he's taken a lot of time off and he's kind of been in and out even here lately, doing some spots here and there, and and hasn't necessarily been on TV consistently. So has he kind of grown accustomed to knowing that that's his role, and his days or his aspirations of being Universal Champion or WWE Champion are probably past him at this point?
To my knowledge, Dolph is very happy with his place on the card. He's got a reduced date contract now, so he's not there as much. He gets plenty of time off. He can focus on other projects. He's very proud of the other projects that he's been working on. And he's very happy doing the comedy. He's happy with some of his media appearances, non-wrestling related. You need in the company people who are willing to champion certain areas. If that area is the development of new talent, as I completely agree, Tyler Breeze was one of the ones who came in and immediately feuded with Dolph. Baron Corbin was another one. Ziggler can also wrestle at the top of the card straight away without any issue. Kofi Kingston, there was a feud there. There was a feud of AJ Styles when he first came in. That was just a great way to establish. He's another one of those ring generals. You need people who champion certain areas. Look at The Miz and the Intercontinental title. Has that belt felt anywhere near as important since he lost that belt? It felt so much bigger when it was over his shoulder. You need people who do that, who focus on that. You need certain tag team wrestlers. You need the New Day in that division and the Usos, people who will always be tag teams. And with Ziggler, you have someone who helped to develop, always puts on a great match. And yeah, if he was in a G1 tournament, I think Ziggler would have 2 or 3 5-star matches in him. He is where he is. He's happy where he is. I'm okay with that.
Are you in favor of a potential Ziggler-Shawn Michaels match down the road? Because I have to tell you, bald Shawn Michaels just didn't do it for me.
That's I had that moment myself where it's not the same guy.
No.
Dolph Ziggler would be more Shawn Michaels than Shawn Michaels is.
Yeah.
It's such a confusing thing. And even wrestling, he's not the same guy. I'm a big fan of Shawn Michaels. Much like The Undertaker, I would be happy if he stayed retired. But a Dolph Ziggler versus Shawn Michaels match is not a bad idea. They both know each other well, they know each other's styles. It could certainly work.
Oh, it could definitely work. I think Ziggler, like you said, is good enough, and Shawn probably has enough left in him to still, pull out a good match. I just wish that maybe it had happened 3 or 4 years ago as opposed to, in 2019 or 2020. But hey, that we can say that about a lot of things. So let's move on to the next match on the card. Kevin Owens against Shane McMahon. Kevin Owens is putting his career on the line, says if he loses to Shane that he will leave the WWE. Again, you would think that with that kind of stipulation, this would be somewhat easy to call, obviously, that they're not going to get rid of Kevin Owens. And they've already done a Kevin Owens quits storyline not too long ago that lasted, I think, a whole 2 weeks before he returned anyway. So you would think that Owens is probably getting the win here. Is there any rumblings with the shakeup over at SmackDown Live? I know that Shane McMahon doesn't really have much of a role in creative or anything on SmackDown. He's more of just an on-air personality. But is this feud with KO a way to maybe get him off television for a little while? And where does Kevin Owens now as a new babyface go from here?
There is an outside chance that Kevin Owens will lose this match, but won't quit WWE. He would just move to Raw. And this is just one of those things, because if there's one thing, Kevin Owens' entire stint on the main roster, there is one constant, always with him, always part of the storylines, always in some way involved. Sami Zayn. I worry sometimes that the creative team struggle to write for Sami Zayn when Owens isn't there. So I think there's an outside chance he goes to Raw and loses this match. However, you're not losing Kevin Owens. It's not happening. And I don't think Shane McMahon's going to be written off. I think as much as people hate him, he does very good work in getting people over. This new face turn, literally an overnight moment when suddenly, Kevin Owens has gone from face to heel. He's gone from heel to face. Let's just start cheering him. Yes, Kevin Owens, we love this guy. Anyone who stuns Shane McMahon is always going to be a fan favourite. Anyone who attacks Shane McMahon is always going to be a fan favourite. So this is hugely beneficial to Kevin Owens to be in this match. I can't see him losing. And I think from here he just goes on to bigger and better things. However, it's also worth pointing out that if Elias comes in and attacks Shane with a guitar, Owens loses.
Well, you alluded to kind of the overnight babyface turn for Owens. Kind of this renegade character. I mean, he's even using the Stone Cold Stunner as a finisher now. So obviously you can see where they're drawing some inspiration from with the character. Do you know what was behind? Was someone on SmackDown Creative a Kevin Owens fan that wanted to get this guy as a babyface? Did Eric Bischoff have anything at all to do with him? Is he maybe a fan of Kevin Owens and wanted to get him on the babyface side of things? Can you tell us anything about the rhyme or reason for this sudden character change for Kevin Owens?
I can. You see, and this is actually really simple. The biggest fan of Kevin Owens in the company is Vince McMahon. He's absolutely Owens' biggest fan. He would not be pushing him in this stone cold position were he not behind him. And the real misnomer here isn't so much the face turn, it's the heel turn. The heel turn was the thing that was not supposed to be happening. Kevin Owens was very unfortunate in that he was the biggest victim of Kofi Kingston. Owens was supposed to be the one getting that momentum, going into WrestleMania and taking the title from Daniel Bryan. He was supposed to be a face when he came back. He was supposed to be a face champion. He was supposed to be facing Randy Orton. He hasn't had that. Then, as a result of an injury to Daniel Bryan, he had to be turned heel in order to feud with Kofi. So really, this, while there is very little rhyme or reason to the flip-flop, really the creative team are just writing what they consider to be a wrong. That he should not have been a heel, that the fans never really got behind the heel turn anyway. They're just righting the wrong, bringing them back to the side of the alignment that they prefer and that he is happy with at the moment and that the fans are happy with at the moment. And really now getting a solid push behind him. He's got big matches like this one, and hopefully from here it's onwards and upwards.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Kofi Kingston there. He's was next on my rundown of the card. He's obviously defending the WWE Championship against Randy Orton. I think, in my opinion, I think this could be the show stealer of the card. I think that these two have the potential to put on a really great match, and like I said, a sleeper type of match that maybe people aren't expecting the most out of, but could really steal the show if they're given enough time and enough creative and leeway to do it. First, let's just go ahead and give me your thoughts on the match itself. Kofi and Orton, a somewhat, I guess, surprising way that they've gone about the build, or uncharacteristic way, kind of breaking kayfabe a little bit, kind of breaking that fourth wall and building this up around, Kofi alluding to Orton holding him down and referencing their match years ago where Orton audibly called him stupid in the ring on a match on Raw, and they've used that as the build for this rivalry and for this match. So first, just give me your thoughts on what have you thought about the way that they've built up this storyline between the two, and how you see this match shaping out at SummerSlam. Me personally, I'm not sure I'm going to pick Randy Orton, but I wouldn't be 100% surprised if Orton took the title this Sunday.
I'm not confident of a winner here. This is probably the match I'm least confident about picking a winner for. Orton has Owens, he has Reigns, who could immediately step into a feud with him. Kingston, I'm not too sure who does come next. I think possibly Daniel Bryan, but it depends where he goes. We might just see that feud again. I have no issue with that. So it's hard to pick a winner. When it comes to the build, Randy Orton is the driving force behind this particular build. I can assure you of that. They have referenced that match quite often since the gauntlet match in which Kofi Kingston was suddenly being considered a WWE title challenger. Orton has led this. They have been in matches, including the Elimination Chamber, and of course, since then, there was a gauntlet match in which Kofi had to take on 5 men in order to get a championship match at WrestleMania. He faced Randy Orton in that, and Orton once again audibly referred to him as stupid. He was referencing that. He wanted the fans to see that. He wanted the fans to make that connection. And what they've made here is a very real build based on those things. And what it shows from Orton is the amount of respect he has for Kofi Kingston, that he will reference that he will show himself as the villain, not just in a kayfabe setting, but he will literally say in this build, I was wrong, I am to blame, I am the problem. That is the amount of respect he is showing to Kofi Kingston in doing this. It helps both men. It makes the match so much more real. And I do think this is going to be a very good match. I mentioned earlier that Orton isn't necessarily known for having the most exciting in-ring style, but when you put him with someone like a Daniel Bryan, like a Kofi Kingston, someone who is the opposite, so Orton will try and slow the match down and be very visceral, very methodical, wearing down limbs, trying to go for the RKO, whereas Kingston will be trying to up the pace, make it faster, doing a lot of high flying. This is one of those where Orton will be the older, more experienced man, looking down on the young, the more callow, who he believes to be stupid, even though neither of these men are sort of young and fresh as comes to like debutantes in the company. They are both quite experienced. They are both ready for this. They both been for a lot to get here. That's the build, and that's what they're showing us. And I think Randy Orton has been leaning in this direction for a while. You look at the build for his match with AJ Styles, Orton wants to be more real. You look at his feud with Jeff Hardy, the Screwdriver. I made myself a bit sick just saying that, but the Screwdriver...
That was awesome.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That was disturbing. That was horrifying. I've watched that match 3 times. I still haven't seen it because I sit with my eyes covered. I don't want to see that ever. Anyway, he's giving us a lot. Orton is far from boring. He's so exciting at the moment. He's driven this feud. Kofi, of course, is still on a high. He's still on that rush. But the quality of your opponents plays a big part. And in Randy Orton, he has the ideal opponent.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I think it can be the sleeper of the card for sure. I want to talk to you a little bit before we move on about Kofi and his run as champion. You kind of alluded just a couple minutes ago that heading into WrestleMania, Kofi was maybe at best the third choice to take the title. You know, it was supposed to be Kevin Owens. Then we heard that it was supposed to be Ali, and then it kind of just fell into Kofi's lap at the time because of the momentum that he had, and they needed a replacement for Ali, and he just kind of ended up being the guy. I've also seen quote-unquote reports that maybe some of creative or management is souring a little bit on Kofi as champion, that New Day's merch sales are dipping a little bit, and maybe he's being held responsible for that. And so maybe they're thinking that Kofi Mania has run its course and it may be time to go in a different direction. What do you think about Kofi's run as champion, the way that they've handled his run, even if he was the third choice to take the title at WrestleMania? And are there any truth to the reports that you've heard about that maybe there may be some on the creative side of things that are souring on Kofi as the champion?
You say about souring on Kofi's run as a champion. And I find a lot of people are also saying that exact same thing about Becky Lynch and about Seth Rollins.
Mm-hmm.
It's not popular to be successful, especially when you're a good guy. And I think you find this in all walks of life when it comes to wrestling. A prolonged championship run as a face leads to a negative reaction. That's one of the things that happened to John Cena from the off. It was starting to happen to CM Punk, which is why they turned him. Steve Austin never held the world title for very long. He never held it long at all. His first big championship run was ended, I think, after 5 months. I want to say 5 months. Yeah, it was April till September. It was 5 months. They always try to make sure that the big face, larger-than-life characters have shorter title runs. This is the way it's done. This is the way it's been for a long time. It's why Becky Lynch could not be a double champion for long. When it comes to things like the merch sales dipping, this is always a time of year that is less profitable for the company. This happens when it comes to viewing figures. You see, the ratings are going up into SummerSlam. Yeah, they always do. They always do. We've had record low viewers. Yeah, we always do this time of year. Always do. Merge sales are dead. Yep, that always happens. I think there has been an element whereby I also mentioned good opponents. I'm a big fan of Baron Corbin. However, Rollins needed different opponents. I like what Lacey Evans is doing so far. However, Becky Lynch needed different opponents. Kofi Kingston has gone the entire opposite way. His opponents have been Daniel Bryan. He's wrestled Seth Rollins, of course. He's wrestled Samoa Joe. He's wrestled Kevin Owens. He's now wrestling Randy Orton. There's 5 championship contenders in 4 months. However, you have to consider, to a certain degree, the caliber of those opponents. Daniel Bryan, top class. It's a great match at WrestleMania, well worth a watch again. Kevin Owens, the sudden heel turn worked against him. It diminished the returns that they could get. Samoa Joe was as part of a wild card, so while it could potentially have been a very good match, and it was an okay match, I quite enjoyed it. He was on a losing streak. There was very little build, and he was a bit of a surprise opponent. They're being subtle with Kofi at the moment. He's not on the show every week. He's not wrestling every week. He's swapping sides due to the wild card, maybe a bit too much. He has a very good opponent, which will make this match important. So I don't think people are souring just yet. But I think they will eventually. I think that's the nature of the beast. I personally don't see him being champion that much longer.
Yeah, it's always fascinating to me with wrestling fans. You know, the title gets hot-shotted around month to month, and so people complain that they want to see more prolonged title runs. And then you get a guy like Kofi who goes on a 5-6 month long reign, and they complain that he's being booked like Superman and that it's not believable, quote unquote, that, you know, someone his size could defeat a Samoa Joe or, you know, probably even a Randy Orton or Kevin Owens, you know. So wrestling fans, I think by and large, are never completely happy, no matter what you give them one way or the other, are they?
No, it's really quite simple. There's a lot of them. They all have different opinions. You can never make everyone happy.
Well, let's move on to the women's side of things. For SummerSlam, we'll start with the SmackDown Women's Championship. Bayley will be defending the title against Ember Moon. Decent match. You know, Ember Moon, I think, is very capable. I think these two will have a solid match. In my opinion, I think Bayley retains the title here. But it seems that with Bayley, whether it's her wrestling career, or really any time we talk about Bayley, for better or worse, we always end up talking about Sasha Banks. These two seem to always be interrelated in one way or another, really since NXT. It seems like since both of these ladies came on the scene, they've been intertwined in some way, somehow. So if we're going to talk about this match, we got to talk about Sasha Banks. Is she coming back? Will it be at SummerSlam? Will she be a heel? Will she be a face? I know you had an interesting take on Twitter that I just saw today about how you think the fans are going to react to Sasha when she does come back. So how do you see this shaking out? What info can you give us about the situation with Sasha Banks and what plans there may be and how they may affect Bayley and Ember Moon and some of these other women's division participants whenever she does come back?
The last I heard on Sasha Banks was that she was ready and willing to come back. However, it's up to the company to decide how they would use her. This is why we've seen her training more recently, getting back in the flow of things. I have not heard that she'll be back at SummerSlam. I think if she was going to return, it would be on the Raw after SummerSlam anyway, because that tends to be the way they do things. I remember Paige's return, there was a lot of hype that she would be at Survivor Series, and then she returned the Raw after Survivor Series. It's one of those things, unfortunately for Bayley, whereby she cannot get out of this shadow. So if she does come back, this being Sasha Banks, I don't think it'll be for this match. I think Bayley deserves a little time to stand alone. And also, to my knowledge, the team was split up and lost their tag titles so that they could go to separate brands and be the champions and wrestle each other at Survivor Series. To my knowledge, they were split up intentionally with that in mind. This obviously has not happened now. Bayley is in the position that was expected, but Sasha has taken a leave of absence. Could still end up being the champion at that time, certainly. I think when she does come back, if it's anytime soon, she will walk straight into a feud with Becky Lynch. But when it comes to coming back in this particular event, I don't personally see it. And yes, as you alluded there, I did have a debate on Twitter, because I personally believe at this point a return from Sasha Banks will not be booed. It doesn't matter what she does, it doesn't matter who she attacks. If she comes back at SummerSlam, she will not get a negative reception.
I find it interesting, like I said, how intertwined it seems like Sasha and Bayley's careers have been, from, they're going to feud, to, now they're the first ever women's tag team champions, and they're going to have this big, long reign, and then that gets cut short. You just alluded to that was done so that they could become singles champions on their own and then fight each other at Survivor Series, but then Sasha Banks, I guess, decides maybe she's not happy with that. She takes a leave of absence from the company. Obviously, like you said, that could still end up happening. We've still got some months to go before Survivor Series, but how much of a detriment do you think it has been, or has it been, for Bayley to be so intertwined and always seemingly be connected with Sasha Banks? Because it seems like Bayley's career has somewhat consistently been maybe not derailed, but plans pushed back, and maybe hasn't taken off the way that some thought she would, because of the fact that she's constantly intertwined with Sasha. It almost seems like another Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn situation.
It exactly is. And I want to make it clear here that in no way is Bayley or Sasha Banks' fault. This is a booking choice to always have them connected. You had the big match in NXT. If I say to someone, oh, what's a good Bayley match? Oh, against Sasha Banks in NXT. Alright, can you name me any others? Can you name me any others?
That Bayley has had?
Bayley matches.
Not off the top of my head. Her Money in the Bank cash-in was was exciting, but I don't think you could qualify that as a match.
She's a very, very good wrestler, and she deserves a little bit more than this, because she debuted on the main roster to help Sasha. She was then involved in a match with Sasha to decide who would face Charlotte. They all fought each other. There were a few niggling injuries, like a shoulder injury and so on and so forth, that slowed Bayley down a little bit. But by and large, WrestleMania, she was involved in a match with Sasha. This was the previous WrestleMania for the Raw Women's Championship, the Fatal 4-Way Elimination match. In the Royal Rumble before that, she was feuding with Charlotte, couldn't get the job done, but did beat Charlotte when Sasha Banks cheated on her behalf. Once again, Sasha Banks. The moment Sasha Banks steps away, and this is historical, the first time we see it was against Alexa Bliss, and Bayley was buried. She didn't just lose that match, she lost it clean as a whistle to a heel. This was followed up by the kendo stick on a pole match. Buried. She had the stick, and she just wouldn't use it. If only Sasha Banks had been there. Of course, who takes the title from Alexa Bliss, even if just for a week? Sasha Banks. She can get the job done. These two are so heavily intertwined. For almost a whole year, it was all about the connection between Sasha and Bayley. From the Elimination Chamber, when Bayley was eliminated because of Sasha Banks, all the way to the following year, Elimination Chamber, when the tag titles were brought in. They are far too intertwined and far too interconnected, and it's a real problem.
Do you think there would be any interest when Sasha does come back? You mentioned that you don't think she'll be booed at any point, no matter what happens. Would they ever consider bringing Sasha back and maybe turning Bayley heel?
Bayley's a difficult one to turn heel. Her whole gimmick sort of works against that, but it's not impossible.
Right.
You mind if I just pause 1 second to get a drink? I'm a bit dry-throated.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been talking a lot. See, if you just bear with me, I won't be a second.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay, and I'm back and good to go.
All right. Well, let's change gears then to the Raw side of things. The fourth horsewoman, Becky Lynch, defends her Raw Women's Championship against Natalya, and it's going to be a submission match. Again, this is one, I think the stipulation somewhat gives the result away. I don't think that they're going to have Becky Lynch tap out to Natalya at SummerSlam, especially with, she's just now came out on the cover of WWE 2K20. Obviously, it has a lot of momentum going her way. They could pull a surprise. I guess you could argue that that would be the biggest surprise of SummerSlam would be if Becky Lynch were to lose this match. But I think with the submission stipulation, I just don't see that happening. So tell me about what you think about this match. You alluded earlier that Becky Lynch may be suffering some of the same problems that maybe a Kofi Kingston or others have with, kind of the baby face finally gets their title reign or their just due, and then the fans start to sour on them a little bit, or maybe that she hasn't feuded with the right people during this title reign. So tell me how you see this match going and what you think of this Becky and Natalya feud overall.
Tricky one. You see, I think this particular feud is weighed down by fan expectation. I think the fans want to see a lot of things. They want to see Becky Lynch against Sasha Banks. WWE can't give them that. They want to see Becky Lynch against Ronda Rousey. WWE can't give them that. What can they give? They can give you against Natalya. Fans don't want that. Well, who else have you got? Who else is there? What other options are there? You've got a very experienced, very talented wrestler to line up against Becky Lynch here. Someone who can really command a ring and who always gets a good match out of Becky anyway. And I think there's a lot of disrespect towards Natalya here. I think the submission stipulation is quite an exciting one, to be honest, because both of these women have submission finishers. Usually if there's an option to pinfall, what's Natalya's finisher? Her actual pinfall finisher? You know what it is?
I wouldn't know, actually. I've only seen her use the sharpshooter as far as I can remember.
It is a discus clothesline, same as Luke Harper, but yeah, you've undoubtedly seen that a lot. She just very rarely goes into a pinfall after it. But both of these women are known for their submissions. So I think it's a very good thing to have this particular stipulation. Someone's going to have to tap. And I've heard from quite a few people that they don't think they'll see Becky Lynch submit, but Becky Lynch taps out more often than she gets pinned in my experience. Particularly in feud with Charlotte, which comes down to submission moves. Matches she's had with Becky Lynch, submission moves there. She has, of course, tapped to Natalya previously. Her match with Asuka at the Royal Rumble, quite recently, she tapped out then. She does tap out. She isn't known for being difficult to tap. So I'm not sure where this idea has come from, that she probably wouldn't tap out. It doesn't really hurt her to tap out. But I think also this match is the one with the most likelihood of interference. yes, there's a potential for Sasha Banks, but when it comes to the players in place, Natalya has friends in high places. So if, for example, a Ronda Rousey was due back, this would be the perfect time. If, for example, Shayna Baszler was going to be called up anytime soon, this would be a perfect time. So I think there's the most potential for that here, even if it's still not that likely. I think Becky's going to win. I think she'll come away with the title. And I think whatever happens next happens next. Nia Jax is expected back relatively soon. It's not ironclad by any ways or means yet. But Ronda Rousey is expected back relatively soon. So I mentioned again earlier Orton was a good opponent for Kofi Kingston. Fan expectation is weighing this one down, and maybe this isn't the right time for title change. But when it comes to options, the company don't have many more at the minute.
Well, before we talk about our main event, let me talk a real quick, just how some quick fire things, maybe some things that we thought we were going to see at SummerSlam, maybe are yet to be determined if we will see. The two biggest of those that I wanted to just kind of get your thoughts on are, will we see some type of Roman Reigns match or interaction with Rowan and or Daniel Bryan, possibly Samoa Joe? You know, there were rumors that we were going to get maybe Reigns and Joe against Bryan and Rowan in a tag team match, you know, but obviously at this week's TV, we just now got to the tip of the iceberg of the mystery attacker, you know, for Reigns being revealed apparently as Rowan. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. And then also the rumors that were swirling around months ago that we were possibly going to get a big Drew McIntyre versus The Undertaker match at SummerSlam this year. That obviously is not going to happen. McIntyre's not even on the card, which is somewhat surprising to me. I wouldn't be surprised if he's involved somehow in the Kevin Owens-Shane McMahon match, but we'd heard rumors about that. So anything you can tell us about either of those two scenarios, or anything else that maybe did or didn't happen for this year's SummerSlam that was thought to maybe have meant to be a couple weeks or months back?
When it comes to Roman and Bryan, that was the plan. The idea was that match would happen at SummerSlam, but things just haven't come about. Lately, Roman has been in a lot of tag matches, or he's been in quite short matches. He hasn't wrestled too much on TV recently. He's had a couple of main events, but in the last few weeks, he's been mostly fighting with inanimate objects. You know, he got attacked by a forklift, he got attacked by a car,
Right.
Probably going to get attacked by a stapler or something next week. You know, standard Roman Reigns. Him and furniture are not friends. So, the match was planned, but it looks like, same as many matches, it has been dropped from the card. I do expect to see that story continue. I think we're definitely going to see an encounter between Roman and Rowan. And at some point, Daniel Bryan's going to have to let on that it was him, because those two are definitely going to be lining up against each other in quite a lot of house shows in future. So that's definitely something I'm looking forward to. The build towards Roman against Bryan should be very interesting. And it really does put Daniel Bryan back on the map in the main event scene for SmackDown Live, which is important, because otherwise Kofi Kingston, if he is still champion, will run out of challenges. When it comes to McIntyre and The Undertaker, I am so very disappointed. I was so excited. This is the first time I've been excited for an Undertaker match since his retirement, because he should have stayed retired, and I think I've mentioned that in a podcast with you before, that I'm not. It was such a good retirement, and then he just kept going. But I wanted to see a match with McIntyre. If you remember Extreme Rules, when Undertaker was on the shot, and then Drew McIntyre appeared behind him, ready to take him down, all the pieces were in place. But this is another example of someone being paired up with someone very high in the card, very high standard, very high station. Now McIntyre is feuding with Cedric Alexander. Nothing against Cedric Alexander, but he's not The Undertaker.
No, that's an understatement, I would say.
Maybe we'll get it in Saudi Arabia. Maybe they're saving it for them. These two have got to cross paths eventually. They've just got to.
Do you think that match, Taker and Goldberg at the last Saudi Arabia show, had anything to do with, maybe even worked twofold, with Undertaker maybe rethinking having a match so soon with Drew McIntyre, and then on the other end of the spectrum, bringing Goldberg back for SummerSlam to kind of redeem himself, like you said, put him in a match with somebody like Dolph Ziggler, who's going to make him look good, who's going to bounce around for him and kind of redeem himself and leave a better taste in fans' mouth from Saudi Arabia. So did that catastrophe of a match have anything to do with either of these matches taking place or not taking place, the Goldberg match and the Undertaker-McIntyre match?
The two situations are very different because the two men are very different. Goldberg is looking to redeem himself. He's looking to, and yeah, the match definitely had an impact on his determination to get back in the ring and get back in the ring soon. He's looking to get some closure himself. The Undertaker does not think like that. He's always been of the mindset, personally, to give back and to develop. He's closer to Dolph Ziggler than he is to Goldberg. He will be the one going into a match with Drew McIntyre and saying, look, I want Drew McIntyre to pin me in the middle of the ring. Whereas WWE Creative will be there going, no, 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 not no. No. Drew will be elevated by a match with The Undertaker to any degree. Winning could be elevated even more. Don't get me wrong, I'd love to see it, and I think The Undertaker can afford it. It won't happen that way, though. So it's two very different situations, two very different people. I think Goldberg was influenced by the match, whereas The Undertaker got back in the ring as a tag partner of Roman Reigns, looked great, looked back to his previous self. I don't think he felt the need to redeem himself. If he did, he would have been in the singles match. But maybe any number of things could have happened. It could have been possible that there was never a plan for him to wrestle Drew McIntyre. It could be that The Undertaker just pulled a muscle or something and he wants to rest it. And there could be any number of reasons.
And then last thing, going back to the Roman Reigns, Daniel Bryan storyline, I did want to ask, are there plans to turn Samoa Joe face? Now, we saw a little bit of that with the angle, him checking on Roman. It would seem like another kind of middle of the night, overnight type of turn where they were just in this blood feud a couple weeks ago, and now, Joe may be coming to the aid of Roman Reigns. Is that a plan going forward? Have you heard anything that's actually the plan, or maybe it's just a swerve, a beat in the storyline, if you will? But anything that you've heard on that front?
At the time, the intention was just to really stress the situation. The plan wasn't, at the time, to make Joe seem more sympathetic, although that is what it succeeded in doing. Over the course of the night, it was very clear that Joe was still firmly heel. There was a very good reception to it, though, and the company has shown in the last few months that they're willing to listen to the fans on certain things. As I've mentioned, Roman's been in a lot of tag matches recently. He's been heavily protected. And a pairing with Samoa Joe is certainly a very exciting concept, especially when you consider that you can't have Roman running through both Bryan and Rowan. Rowan's in the midst of a very good push himself. If he could potentially be shown to be an equal to Roman to Samoa Joe, that's a very good position for him. And Roman's another one who likes to give back a lot. So the intention was not to make Samoa Joe into a face, but they do this sometimes where they test the water. Think back to Alexa Bliss beating Sasha Banks. Nia Jax picked her up on her shoulders and then dropped her. Testing the waters of an Alexa Bliss face turn. They do this sometimes. It adds another little layer to the character. It shows that Joe, who is willing to turn up at someone's house and spend time with their family, that really creepy Wendy thing. But he's a bit uncomfortable with someone getting hit by a car. It's a strange one, isn't it? It's a strange one. I think it was to show the extremity of the situation. But maybe in the long run, it can show the joy of maturing a little bit.
Yeah, definitely a lot of interesting ways they could maybe go with this. So it'd be interesting to see where they go maybe post SummerSlam with all of those guys. Well, so here we are. We're at our main event of the evening for SummerSlam. And I think in some ways this may be the most interesting match to me just because of the possible ramifications of it depending on how it plays out going forward. You got the Universal Champion Brock Lesnar defending against Seth Rollins. And my biggest thought going into this match, I think Brock is going to win. He's my pick in the match. But my thing is, if and when he does, if Rollins doesn't win the title back, what are we going to do with Seth Rollins? It seems like he's had so many misfires with him that whether it was injuries, whether it was creative, maybe not pulling the trigger on him quick enough when he got the momentum or got the fan support, and maybe a lot of his pushes and title wins were maybe just a couple months too late. I don't think the partnership with Becky Lynch did him any favors. Just for me as a fan, I didn't enjoy that peek behind the curtain where they were made a couple on screen. As soon as I saw him come out in the Man's Man t-shirt, I knew it was going to be downhill for him, just in my opinion. So how do you see this match, and what do you see? Are you in agreement with me that this is kind of a pivotal time in Seth Rollins' career, that if he doesn't win the title here, and it doesn't look like he's going to, where do we go from here with him?
It is a very hard question to answer. I think as much as you say it's a pivotal match, and you're right, it's also a pivotal moment for that championship. If Brock Lesnar wins it and vanishes for what at this point would be a third year in a row, what is the point of it? What is the point of that title? This will literally be his third year winning the title and then vanishing. He might as well just keep it. Even if he gets beaten, he might as well just keep it. It cannot be allowed to happen again because of the damage it does to the company. But at the same time, they've made Seth out to look like he has no chance at all. But maybe, his trusty friend the Low Blow will work out again. Maybe it will be wonderful interference from Becky Lynch that will help him save his championship. Yeah, no one really liked that pairing being on screen. No one really enjoyed that. They did not enjoy that. They were very vocal about not enjoying that. Yeah, that was a trying time for everyone.
If Seth Rollins can't beat Brock Lesnar unless Becky Lynch comes out and helps him, I don't know what that would be the death knell, I think, for his character. If his girlfriend has to come help him beat the Beast, Brock Lesnar, I don't know if there'd be any coming back from that for him.
My hope is that he will win. I think at this point he needs just a strong win. We can't keep waiting.
If he does win, to your point about, well, if Brock wins, what's the point of him having the title and vanishing? If Rollins wins the title back, what was the point of Brock returning at Money in the Bank and cashing in just to hold the title for, a month or so, just to give it back? Seth Rollins already had the big win at WrestleMania over Brock Lesnar, so what would it do for Rollins to just beat Brock again?
It's hard to say. I think it would be a big deal for Rollins because any win over Brock is a big deal, especially if it's a much more competitive match than it was. I think the company have put themselves into a no-win situation here. I remember putting out not long before Extreme Rules that Brock Lesnar will be cashing in just to give Seth Rollins an opponent for SummerSlam. There is too large a divide between the top-level talent and their challengers at the moment. This, unfortunately, is a downside of prolonged title runs, especially where Brock Lesnar is involved, because everyone is defined down by Brock Lesnar. Now, there are possibilities. If Brock wins and then at the next pay-per-view he is challenged by someone like Bobby Lashley, say Braun Strowman, and they get the win, that's a different story entirely. Suddenly we have a whole load of new storylines, someone else is being developed, all is good. It's also possible that Seth Rollins could get help from someone like Drew McIntyre, who he is due to be looking at a feud with. Even though Drew is a heel, he can't get to that title if the title isn't on the show. And Drew's just an example. You could also have someone like Roman Reigns, just doing what needs to be done to make sure Brock Lesnar does not escape with that belt. There are a lot of possibilities. It could be an overbooked mess. It could be Goldberg again. Anything can happen. There are a lot of bad options. I don't think there are many good options. And I think the best thing they can do is just let Seth win and give him someone else to feud with.
So then is that your pick? I know you said you think Seth needs to win. Is he your pick? If you had to put some money on it, is he your pick to win?
Yeah, go on then. Yes, I do. I think Seth has to win it. I think he will win it because you cannot have a third year. And at this point, it's not Brock in charge. It's not Vince in charge of the direction of this particular feud. Paul Heyman is in charge of Raw now. Paul Heyman knows that you can't have someone vanishing with the tail for so long. He's seen it. He's seen the effects of it. He does pay attention. Surely he's not going to do this.
But Brock's his boy. I'm sure he thinks Brock with the title is good for the company, right? I mean, wouldn't you think that with Paul Heyman in charge, it would be more likely that Brock wins?
I honestly wouldn't. Because you've got to remember, yes, Brock and Heyman have been paired up for a long time, but it wasn't Paul Heyman's decision to become Brock Lesnar's advocate again. That was a collective, creative decision. And while, yes, Heyman's been involved in quite a lot in this regard, he, for example, was one of the main voices pushing for Finn Balor to have a match with Lesnar at the Royal Rumble. Heyman wants to work with what he has. There are no guarantees that he has Brock Lesnar. Because that's down to Vince McMahon putting his hand in his pocket. You cannot just go to Vince and say, look, I want Brock this week, this week, this week, and this week. It's not going to happen. So Heyman wants to work with what he has. Whether that translates to a victory for Rollins, I'm not sure. Really, I think this is going to be the first real power struggle between McMahon and Heyman.
So it should definitely be interesting. I think that, like I said, it has a lot of ramifications. I'm not sure. This may be the one match where we maybe differ a little bit. I'm not sure I can put my money on Seth. I think Brock is going to come away with this win. And it's funny that you mentioned some of the names that maybe could, that Seth could potentially feud with. I think you mentioned Braun Strowman. I think he could be the wild card in this. He's a guy, we haven't seen him for a little bit. We've heard rumors that maybe that Heyman is a big fan of his. So I think maybe we could see Braun Strowman be the guy that topples Brock and takes the title from him. And unfortunately, maybe Seth gets knocked down a peg or two. I'm sure it's not like he's going to disappear or anything, from the main event scene. But I'm not sure that Seth is going to get another sustained run with that Universal Championship.
True, I would agree with that. It's a difficult one to call. I do think he will get it back, but you're right. Braun Strowman is in line for a push. From everything I've heard, Heyman's a very big fan of Braun, and Braun's there every week, so certainly it's a good option.
Well, no matter what happens, I'm sure it'll be exciting. SummerSlam, again, is this Sunday on the WWE Network. Make sure you guys tune in. I'm sure we'll be talking about it in the coming weeks after this Sunday and talking about what went down and what's going to happen going forward. Tom, I want to thank you for joining us on the podcast on Dropkick DiSKussions with Sportskeeda. Tell us where, obviously you're doing some work for Sportskeeda, but tell us a little bit about where else we might be able to find you where we can get at you on Twitter and social media and find some of your insider reports.
Well, my Twitter is at Colohue, that's Colohue, nice and easy one. I post a lot on there about little bits of information I get from sources. Sometimes you just hear whispers and bits of conversation, or people just relay what they heard or their opinions. So there's usually a bit of information on there. It's also, as you alluded to earlier, you get some quite strong debates. It's quite a passionate community there that I quite enjoy. I am, of course, on Sportskeeda, where I release most of the information that I do manage to get from people inside the WWE or in the wrestling business. I always take my time to make sure I've got quite a few things for each topic, so you'll get quite a few quotes and interesting things there. In addition, Pro Wrestling Torch, working for Wade Keller there with a Roman Reigns-ometer. Daily DDT, I will be doing a SummerSlam rebook, which should be up already by the time this recording goes out. So that's something to look forward to as well. And I just want to say thank you for having me. I'm hoping when I get back onto Dropkick DiSKussions and have a good listen, I came across well.
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully we get to do this again, and hopefully everybody listened, enjoyed what they heard, and will join us again next time when we get together on Dropkick DiSKussions. Appreciate you guys listening. Thanks again for Tom for joining. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. Trust me, he's a great follow. Lots of good information, lots of good discussions and debates going on there. So make sure you follow him at Colohue. You can follow me on Twitter at Korey Gunz, KoreyGunz. And we will catch you all next time on Dropkick DiSKussions.